Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I have a special guest on, Lauren Elaine. She's a real estate investor. She has properties in Florida and she has ties to Maui. And so welcome to my show, Lauren.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad we finally got to connect. I think we actually maybe touched base a while back on Threads when Threads kind of first came out. I remember connecting with you and I saw Maui, so I was super interested. And you don't see too many investors, a lot of times on social media from, like Maui, Oahu. So I always like to connect with them. And so it was fun. And then we kind of touched base again recently. I think I'm not sure what I posted something and it had something dealing with maybe cost of living and whatnot. And you kind of replied something about Hawaii has to be at one at the top. And we touched base, and I'm glad I finally got you on here. But why don't you tell my audience a little bit about your journey and your story?
Okay, yeah. So I started initially on Maui and bought my first primary residence. And it was a fixer-upper because, as we know, in Maui, everything is very expensive. And fixed that home up and ended up renting it out and building a tiny house in the back part of the property. And the rent from that paid for the entire mortgage. So I felt like I was living for free, and I had just discovered a hack that no one had ever told me about. And so I started to get interested in real estate investing. And then I was looking for markets that I could do that because I felt like enough money at the time to do this on Maui. So I decided to look for the best place for embarking on this journey. And I found a place in Ocala, Florida, where they were doing huge developments in this really small town. And they had dropped $1 billion into this small equestrian community. So I saw an opportunity to go there and develop horse properties for people to rent when they come for the season. And so I've been doing that for the last, I probably since, 2020.
All right. So before we get into this unique kind of strategy that you're going to talk about, but kind of let's go back to the beginning in Maui. Was that your initial thought process of kind of looking at it as an investment, or were you just buying something to
No,
live? Okay. And then that
yeah.
tiny home that you mentioned, you just decided to do that, or you kind of had whispers of that from real estate investing and whatnot?
No, I just had kind of decided to do that, like, because the house, it was a three-bedroom house. It was big, it was beautiful. And I was just like, I don't really need all of this. And rather than renting out the rooms or something, I was like, the properties, it's got a lot of property, or it's a half an acre, which on Maui is a lot of property. And so I was like, I'll just build a little tiny house back here. And I was traveling a lot at that time. So I was like, this will be perfect. I'll just rent this out and I didn't even think that it would cover the entire mortgage. I just thought it'll help offset the expenses. And it worked out better than, so I really just fell into it. I wasn't thinking about real estate investing. I was very much focused on my W-2 job, being a dietitian, and had never read anything or heard anything, like had never read Rich Dad Poor Dad or anything like that.
Oh, so you did have a W-2. Are you still doing the dietitian side or just full-time real estate investing right now?
I'm a full-time real estate investor now.
Ah, okay. Was there like something that kind of pushed you in that direction, or you just your focus, your passion more is now real estate investing?
Well, yeah, when COVID hit, then like everybody else, there was no, everything was shut down on Maui. There was no more work. I was actually in Bali at the time, so I didn't even come back. I was planning on just being there for 2 weeks, and I ended up staying for 6 months. And then when I did come back, I came back and went to Alaska because I do spend my summers there sometimes. And there was work there. So I was like, let me just do this job and make some money. And I had some money saved up. And I just thought, okay, if I'm ever going to get involved in real estate investing, now is the time. And my eyes had been opened up to it by this house hacking on Maui. And I just thought, now's the time. It's now or never. You know, you don't always get this break from your W-2 to be able to look back at your life and reflect on it and go, is this what I want to be doing? And am I on the right path? And so that was kind of that moment for me.
So how did you go from house hacking to like this strategy that you're doing now, or this, and even you're doing also short-term rentals also, right? Or mid-term rentals in Florida too, right? So how did you go from house hacking to this now, and all the way across the country? I mean, basically.
Well, I've never been afraid. You know, I've traveled a lot, so I've never been afraid to just pick up and move. So for me, I looked at Salt Lake City because I love to ski and that's a growing market. I really was just doing market research of like, where can I invest that is going to be affordable and where I can grow and take risks that don't feel so big. And so Florida was one of those markets. And then I started with one small flip. Like I my first house I bought for cash $50,000 and had a hole in the ceiling. I mean, it was derelict. It it needed a lot of renovation, essentially everything. It needed electrical, roof, you know, down to the studs. And so I had gone to a bunch of networking events, real estate meetups, and it really was just for me connecting with people who were already doing it and learning from them. I had no idea of how I was going to start or what my first property was going to be. And somebody gave a wholesaler brought this $50,000 property to me. I ended up putting like $45,000 into it using a hard money loan, and I sold it for 215. And
Nice.
so I that to me, I got really lucky because having a big win on your first property, it's huge because it really encourages you. I'm like, that was more money that I had made in a year and I had just done it in like 3 months. So it really was a big eye opener. And once you feel that feeling, you can never go back. And I was just like, wow, this is a whole new world for me. And so just kept going and going. And really, it's all about the networking for me. Like, I think if you are beginning and you don't know where to start by going to real estate meetups and, you know, meeting people who are already doing it, and you learn so much from them.
Yeah, that's what I like to touch on a lot too. And I think a lot of people think that they need properties to go to these events or even be, network with people. But I try to tell them, just go before you even get started, before you even get a property. Just you're gonna meet so many people. And that's the one thing I found is in this community, everyone is super helpful and everyone is willing to share ideas and contacts and advice and even the mistakes. And that's what I like to share. I like to share a lot of the mistakes that I've made. So for you, has everything just, it sounds like, you're doing really well, a lot of success. Has everything just been, easy and passive as they like to talk about on social media?
Of course not. It's never like that. You know, that house that I just talked about, that first flip, the contractor stole $5,000 from the first contractor I was using, stole $5,000 from me. I gave him a deposit for him to start, and we got delayed because of permits. And then he came back and said, "Will you cost me?" Because I had it on my schedule. And so I'm just going to keep your $5,000. And like, good luck. So, you know, when you're starting out, you're like, oh my gosh, $5,000. That's a lot of money. I was like, how am I even going to be able to afford this? You know, it was a hard money loan. The stress and the pressure of that and getting that done, you have so much anxiety going through it. But when you're looking back on it, you're always able to be like, wow, that was a really incredible experience. But going through it, it doesn't feel like everything's always working out. In fact, it feels like you're just constantly putting out fires. And
Exactly.
like
Yeah.
being a firefighter has prepared you for being a real estate investor.
Yeah, I just talked about that yesterday. I think that's, has been super helpful for me is, because a lot of times, we go to, people's worst days, right? We go to incidents and they're having a bad day. And our number one thing is, like you're saying, we got to put out not, fires, but
Literally, yeah, figuratively.
yeah, fired, but it's also just making sure that we don't leave the situation worse than we got there. So, we're trying to mitigate the situation and just kind of calm everything down, and then we can kind of figure things out. So exactly what you're saying. And that's the one thing is we've all encountered problems, and my number one thing is just making sure you have a lot of reserves in the beginning. And I think that's the mistakes that
Yes.
I made. And like you're saying, that first, your contractor walked away with money, or even just your first, HVAC replacement or water heater, and you're just like, oh man, how am I gonna get through this? And that's the one thing I like to touch on. But I also want to touch on, so you're doing flips, you're doing some short-term rentals, but I want to know more about this other kind of strategy, I guess you could call it, or how you got into it, because I've never heard of it. And this is, I'm so intrigued by this.
Yeah. I don't know if I've ever met another person who's doing it either at any real estate meetups. Maybe in this local area, there's probably one or two, but yeah, I take equestrian properties. Either maybe they're fully developed or they're not. I mean, this is a horse community here. So there are 10-acre farms, 5-acre farms, 20-acre farms that maybe in the past were getting kind of run down and dilapidated. If you've ever been on a farm or lived on a farm, you know that things are always needing to be fixed and repaired. And so they get run down really easily. And usually there's not the money there to be able to repair them. And there's certainly not the rental income there to be able to rent out these nice farms. But the exception to that are these places that are popping up, which I had no idea about before, but there's communities here in Ocala. There's a place called Wellington. There's some in Ohio. So this is a strategy that people could use elsewhere. It's not just for this town, but anywhere where people are coming to compete. So we've all seen like Rolex or these horse events where they're either, running around the racetrack, racing that way, or they're jumping over the jumps, or they're doing the dressage. Like there's these different horse events that people do, and they go very high levels to like the Olympics. So it's a serious career for a lot of people, which I had no idea about. I didn't realize. And so, yeah, they spend a lot of time and a lot of money on these horses. Some of them sell for they'll buy initially for $100,000, $200,000, and they'll end up selling them for $1 million or, well into the six figures. So
The
they need
horse?
the horse. Yeah.
Oh,
Yes. So
man.
they need a property that's going to be safe, that's going to feel like it's up to date, that they had a really nice barn. And so I saw that niche that no one was really providing these people that when they come down here for the winter time to compete. And so I started looking for properties that could be developed. And I have two other business partners on the equestrian properties. And so together we looked for places that could be developed into either they have a house on the property. One had two houses and a garage. So we turned that garage into a barn. And then we added an arena. We added turnouts for them to turn the horses out. So we turned it into everything that they would need when they come down for 6 months. And that property rents out for almost $9,000 a month.
Wow.
Yeah.
I- I'm I'm stunned. I have never heard of it. I mean, even when we were talking about it off camera a little bit, I'm just so intrigued, and do you see a lot of other investors doing it in that area? I mean, other people?
It's growing, but I see more people coming down and purchasing properties, and maybe they use it part of the year and then they want to rent it out part of the year. But there's not a lot of people who are doing it, just because I think it is something that does take a little bit more money up front. Because, to put an arena in, it can be $50,000. You have to really be sure of the numbers on the other side of it. And you have to be sure that you're going to be able to get the rent. And I think people just don't know, it's just so niche. They've never seen anyone doing it before. So it's hard to do something when you haven't seen it done. And so it's a lot easier to just go, I'm going to do an Airbnb. So there's, there is a little bit more competition of people who maybe are renting out their farm, or they have stalls, a barn that they're not using anymore. They'll do that. But I don't see anyone who's doing it as a strategy.
Mm. So are you actually learning like how to configure, like the arenas and the barn, or you're
Yeah.
more like, oh, okay.
I've
So,
learned so much about horses that I never I never wanted to know, didn't think I would know. But yeah, now I can go onto a property and I can look at the layout of the property, and I would say, like, this is where the arena should go. We should put paddocks here. The paddocks should not be square at the angles because horses will run through them if they're square. But if you just curve them, then they'll just follow the fence line and run in a circle. So they are less likely to run out. So little things like that where I've learned that I didn't know at the beginning, and I just started by interviewing. I found the best people in the equestrian world that were living here. And I said, hey, can I have, 5 minutes of your time to ask you a couple questions? And then as I built relationships, I actually would have them come out and like advise me on what to do. And because they're just people in the community, they're not doing this themselves. They're more than happy to like give me advice and share their information and their knowledge and talk about what's best for the horses. And so, yeah, I've learned a lot about how to set up the property so that it's most effective and it's what people want to rent so that it becomes the most desirable place.
so I'm not sure. Is this also where like the short-term rental and mid-term rentals fall into play? Like, do you have these properties, like there's houses on them where you're also short-term renting for maybe clients or whatnot that are training, I guess?
Yeah, so my short-term rentals are kind of separate. So I have the farm, which includes like a house, a barn, an arena, the stalls, everything that person needs to bring their horses in and utilize that as like a midterm rental. And then I have Airbnbs in town where people who are coming to maybe watch the shows at the equestrian center, or maybe they have horses that are staying on site and they're just here for 2 weeks, or they're coming for something totally unrelated. So I'm doing both things separately.
And did this kind of all was this the plan? Like like kind of intertwining everything, like the short-term rentals and everything with the horse side, or is it kind of they just came
I
together?
I never had a plan. I never had a plan. Everything just happened one after the other. So it was like initially it was one equestrian property and it had everything, but it was just kind of run down. So it was like, okay, fix up that property and rent that out. And then it was finding another one, developing another horse property. Then I was at a local real estate meetup and someone was telling me how incredible Airbnb is. I hadn't even really heard about Airbnb or known about Airbnb because I was living abroad and then I was living on Maui. We don't really have Airbnb on Maui. So or at that time we didn't. Like people weren't really using it there. I should say it did exist, but I wasn't privy to it. And so I just went to a local real estate meetup and this woman was telling me how great her Airbnbs do. And she had a little course and I was like, I'll do your course. And she comes around with you and looks at properties. We toured around the local area. And so she was kind of a mentor in that sense. And so then I started getting into the Airbnbs.
Nice. What's interesting is like you're saying, there was no, I mean, you had a plan, but there wasn't really a plan. And
Yeah.
I think that's what's great about real estate too, is, there's so many different avenues to go down and people are kind of finding their niche. And, so you have short-term rentals, this equestrian, but along this, I guess maybe you've found some sort of side hustle or another business in the process. And I saw this on your social media like something with tortoises, and this is something else I'm super intrigued with.
Yeah. So tortoises are a protected species here in Florida. And when I bought one of my equestrian properties, or I bought vacant land to develop, I cleared the land and found out that there were over 25 tortoise burrows, and you can't have holes in the ground where horses might be running or stepping. So this property was unusable with the tortoises. They had to be moved. In order to move the tortoises here in Florida, you have to have a certified tortoise agent come out, survey the property, do the permits, and then catch them and move them for you. And then you have to like pay the person who's taking them as well. So it ends up costing around $5,000 per tortoise to move. And a big part of that fee goes to this certified tortoise agent. And so I decided to do the certification myself, and I got certified in removing tortoises. And so I use it only for my properties, but I have had people ask me to come out and do surveys for them, and they're like, I'll pay you $1,000. And I was just like, wow, really? And there's so few certified tortoise agents in the area that they're willing to pay. And there's big developments coming in. So it could truly be a full-time job if you wanted it to be.
Okay, this may be a silly question, but like, do you actually have to catch the tortoises yourself? I mean, is that what the certification
Yeah.
entails? Oh,
Yeah,
oh,
you can just do the survey and apply for the permits for them, and maybe they have somebody that is going to come in, but you have to be certified in order to catch the tortoises. So yeah, they teach you how to properly catch them because they can't thermoregulate. That's why they need these little burrows in the ground. And so they can't be left out in the sun. So if you catch one and you leave it out in the sun, it could die. They also have really strong homing instincts. So if you just picked up a tortoise and drove it a mile down the road and it was confused, it didn't know, and you dropped it off, it didn't know where it was, it would actually just start walking and it would never stop walking. And because it's trying to find its home, its burrow. And so it ends up dying. So they're like, we need people to be trained because they're protected. And so you learn all of these things about the tortoises, how to properly catch them and move them so that for their well-being.
man. So now your horses and tortoises. Now you've learned,
I know.
man. This is yeah, like we talked about. I said this might have to be another episode. Also, going into like the side hustle and having another business. But that's kind of what I'm really focusing on is helping people realize that there's so many ways to make money out there. And it doesn't necessarily have to be real estate, but just find something and there's different ways to do it. And like you gave, like you said, you're tortoise certified, I guess now, and and you can get a lot of money from that. So that's very interesting. So
Yeah, I always tell people when they're just starting out, like, don't have that analysis paralysis or think you have to know everything to get going, because I found so many ways to make money that surrounds real estate that I never ever would have discovered if I had waited to know everything before I started. There's so many periphery businesses that support real estate investors that you can get involved in that can help you make money if you need to on the side and support, but keep you in that same industry.
totally agree. And you kind of touched on it earlier, about, networking and whatnot. But like, where would you tell someone or how would you tell someone to start today if they wanted to head down this path of, real estate or financial freedom and whatnot?
Yeah, I think in-person meetups are number one because there's something that happens in the brain when you see somebody else doing something and you go, wow, this is possible. It's like the marathon time was never under 3 hours until that one guy broke the record. And then all of a sudden the next year, 10 other people did it. So once we do something, we see something being done, we feel like we can do that too. And so in-person meetups are number one. And then also social media, like that's how I'm connecting with you, reaching out to people, talking with people, messaging people that are maybe just getting started out or just like one level above you. We all know there are the people who have a million followers and are posting all the time, but maybe just find somebody who's like just getting started and you guys can be comrades in it and share information because you're kind of at the same level, and you can ask for advice. So I think just connecting with people, networking, and then just getting started. Like you just have to initially take that first leap. And maybe your first property is going to be a wholesale, or maybe it's going to be a flip or something that's more accessible depending on where you're at and how much money you have and how much time you have. And also partnerships are really great. So if you maybe have the time, but you don't have the money, you can partner. There are a lot of people who have money but don't have time. And so finding somebody that you can partnership, and by being there and talking to every person you meet about what you're doing and what you want to do.
Well, before we move on, then, since you're talking about partnerships and networking, let's just go into like maybe some selfless promotion real quick about like where people can connect with you, or if they wanted to invest in Florida or even Maui or whatnot, but how can they reach out to you?
The best place is either on Instagram at Lauren Elaine Show, is my real estate page. And they can also email me at laurenelaine48@gmail.com. I always respond to people who want, if you have a question and you just want it answered. I've had people say, hey, can you send me your calculator for Airbnb? I'll send you my calculator. So any questions you have, just feel free to email me or message me on Instagram.
Nice. Okay, I'll put all the links below. And I did have a question though. So since you do, you built, like you said, a tiny home or ADU in Maui, and you are doing, fix and flips and things in Florida, what would you say from a like permitting standpoint, or having like what is the time, like the different timelines for the two different markets?
Well, they couldn't be more different. Like Maui is the slowest to get a permit on Maui, really slow. But if you have a good relationship with the building department, things can move faster. Florida, they are very lenient on their permits. There are some areas in Florida where they don't even require you to have a permit. They're if it's rural, they just say, hey, as long as you're not putting in like a septic system or something like that, you can build a small ADU and it's no problem. So they're kind of opposites in that regard. That's one of the reasons why I chose Florida, was because it is so quick and easy to get things through the building department.
Terrific. That's what I figured that, but I just wanted to hear it from someone that was actually doing it in two different markets.
Yeah.
One other thing too, you kind of touched on, you didn't get started reading, you didn't read Rich Dad Poor Dad. And was there a book that pushed you down this path that you came across?
There was actually. So I had mentioned that I went to Alaska for the summer after, when COVID hit. And I actually was doing a construction job there for the summer, which is another great side hustle if you are young and you have your summers free, or you don't have kids, and you can go to Alaska as a female in the construction industry. You're almost certain to be hired because they need to fill that quota. And so I had made a good chunk of money at that time, and I was reading books about taxes and how to, not have to pay as much in taxes. And I read this book. It was called, oh gosh, it's an attorney. I found it on Amazon. I was just looking for tax hacks or whatever. And so I think it's just called like Section 121. And it was an attorney who was talking about how to reduce your taxes. I wish I could remember his name, but that was the book for me that made me start thinking about real estate, because he talks about real estate in it.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So, well, most people, Rich Dad Poor Dad is that book that, they kind of mention. Have you read it though, since you started this journey?
Yes. Yeah. Since I've started, I've read a
Okay.
lot of, I read books all the time. I have books on my desk right now that are, the negotiation book by that FBI
Yeah.
negotiator. That one's a really good one. Yeah, I try to read every single book I can get my hands on.
I love it. I love this story. I mean, like I said, I'm so intrigued, and like I saw the tortoises. I was like, what is going on here? So I'm glad I got to find out more. But
Well, and
where
that speaks to me not being good at social media. Like I'm terrible at it. I usually use it to like message with people, but I feel like I need to put a more cohesive story out there so that people can see what it is I'm actually doing.
I definitely think you're gonna blow up, if you start posting more things about the equestrian and the tortoises, and it's yeah, like I don't see anyone else doing it, and I think this is a very niche thing, and it's gonna get you growing very quickly.
Yeah.
Um, so where, before we wrap things up, where's your next journey gonna be? Like you seem like you travel quite a bit, so where's the next adventure to?
My next travel adventure, well, I'm going to Florida or Florida, what am I thinking? I'm in Florida. I'm going to Alaska this summer and then I'll go to Hawaii. So just, revisiting those places and hopefully going to go to Costa Rica as
Huh,
well. And then I'm also going to go to the Bigger Pockets Conference in October, which is in Mexico. So
nice.
those, yeah, just travel adventures in the books.
Cool. Well, I'll put all your links below and hope to see more of you on social media. I'm sure you're gonna get a big following from, what you're doing out there. But thanks for coming on, and I love hearing your story. And we'll catch up again later.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we got to connect.
Okay, thanks, Lauren.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.